This is Chapter 5 of Alonzo Fitz. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Alonzo Fitz and Other Stories by Mark Twain, Chapter 5, The Great Revolution in Pitcairn. Let me refresh the reader's memory a little. Nearly 100 years ago, the crew of the British ship Bounty mutinied, set the captain and his officers adrift upon the open sea, took possession of the ship, and sailed southward. They procured wives for themselves among the natives of Tahiti, then proceeded to a lonely little rock in mid-Pacific called Pitcairn's Island, wrecked the vessel, stripped her of everything that might be useful to a new colony, and established themselves on shore. Pitcairn's is so far removed from the track of commerce that it was many years before another vessel touched there. It had always been considered an uninhabited island. So when a ship did at last drop its anchor there in 1808, the captain was greatly surprised to find the place peopled. Although the mutineers had fought among themselves and gradually killed each other off until only 2 or 3 of the original stock remained, these tragedies had not occurred before a number of children had been born. So in 1808 the island had a population of 27 persons. John Adams, the chief mutineer, still survived, and was to live many years yet as governor and patriarch of the flock. From being mutineer and homicide, he had turned Christian and teacher, and his nation of 27 persons was now the purest and devoutest in Christendom. Adams had long ago hoisted the British flag, and constituted his island as an appanage of the British crown. Today the population numbers 90 persons, 16 men, 19 women, 25 boys, and 30 girls, all descendants of the mutineers, all bearing the family names of those mutineers, and all speaking English, and English only. The island stands high up out of the sea, and has precipitous walls. It is about 3/4 of a mile long, and in places is as much as half a mile wide. Such arable land as it affords is held by the several families according to a division made many years ago. There is some livestock, goats, pigs, chickens, and cats, but no dogs, and no large animals. There is one church building, used also as a capitol, a schoolhouse, and a public library. The title of the governor has been, for a generation or two, magistrate and chief ruler, in subordination to Her Majesty the Queen of Great Britain. It was his province to make the laws as well as execute them. His office was elective. Everybody over 17 years old had a vote, no matter about the sex. The sole occupations of the people were farming and fishing, their sole recreation, religious services. There has never been a shop in the island, nor any money. The habits and dress of the people have always been primitive, and their laws simple to puerility. They have lived in a deep Sabbath tranquillity, far from the world and its ambitions and vexations, and neither knowing nor caring what was going on in the mighty empires that lie beyond their limitless ocean solitudes. Once in 3 or 4 years a ship touched there, moved them with aged news of bloody battles, devastating epidemics, fallen thrones, and ruined dynasties, then traded them some soap and flannel for some yams and breadfruit, and sailed away, leaving them to retire into their peaceful dreams and pious dissipations once more. On the 8th of last September, Admiral de Horsey, Commander-in-Chief of the British fleet in the Pacific, visited Pitcairn's Island, and speaks as follows in his official report to the Admiralty. They have beans, carrots, turnips, cabbages, and a little maize, pineapples, fig trees, custard apples, and oranges, lemons, and coconuts. Clothing is obtained alone from passing ships, in barter for refreshments. There are no springs on the island, but as it rains generally once a month, they have plenty of water, although at times in former years they have suffered from drought. No alcoholic liquors, except for medicinal purposes, are used, and a drunkard is unknown. The necessary articles required by the islanders are best shown by those we furnished in barter for refreshments, namely, flannel, serge, drill, half-boots, combs, tobacco, and soap. They also stand much in need of maps and slates for their school, and tools of any kind are most acceptable. I caused them to be supplied from the public stores with a Union Jack for display on the arrival of ships, and a pit saw, of which they were greatly in need. This, I trust, will meet the approval of their lordships. If the munificent people of England were only aware of the wants of this most deserving little colony, they would not long go unsupplied. Divine service is held every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. and at 3 p.m. in the house built and used by John Adams for that purpose until he died in 1829. It is conducted strictly in accordance with the liturgy of the Church of England by Mr. Simon Young, their selected pastor, who is much respected. A Bible class is held every Wednesday, when all who conveniently can attend. There is also a general meeting for prayer on the first Friday in every month. Family prayers are said in every house the first thing in the morning and the last thing in the evening, and no food is partaken of without asking God's blessing before and afterward. Of these islanders' religious attributes no one can speak without deep respect. A people whose greatest pleasure and privilege is to commune in prayer with their God and to join in hymns of praise, and who are, moreover, cheerful, diligent, and probably freer from vice than any other community, need no priest among them. Now I come to a sentence in the Admiral's report which he dropped carelessly from his pen, no doubt, and never gave the matter a second thought. He little imagined what a freight of tragic prophecy it bore. This is the sentence: "One stranger, an American, has settled on the island, a doubtful acquisition." A doubtful acquisition indeed. Captain Ormsby, in the American ship Hornet, touched at Pitcairn's nearly 4 months after the Admiral's visit, and from the facts which he gathered there we now know all about that American. Let us put these facts together in historical form. The American's name was Butterworth Stavely. As soon as he had become well acquainted with all the people, and this took but a few days, of course, he began to ingratiate himself with them by all the arts he could command. He became exceedingly popular and much looked up to, for one of the first things he did was to forsake his worldly way of life and throw all his energies into religion. He was always reading his Bible, or praying, or singing hymns, or asking blessings. In prayer no one had such liberty as he, no one could pray so long or so well. At last, when he considered the time to be ripe, he began secretly to sow the seeds of discontent among the people. It was his deliberate purpose, from the beginning, to subvert the government, but of course he kept that to himself for a time. He used different arts with different individuals. He awakened dissatisfaction in one quarter by calling attention to the shortness of the Sunday services. He argued that there should be 3 three-hour services on Sunday instead of only 2. Many had secretly held this opinion before. They now privately banded themselves into a party to work for it. He showed certain of the women that they were not allowed sufficient voice in the prayer meetings. Thus another party was formed. No weapon was beneath his notice. He even descended to the children, and awoke discontent in their breasts because, as he discovered for them, they had not enough Sunday school. This created a third party. Now, as the chief of these parties, he found himself the strongest power in the community. So he proceeded to his next move, a no less important one than the impeachment of the Chief Magistrate James Russell Nicoy, a man of character and ability, and possessed of great wealth, he being the owner of a house with a parlor to it, 3 acres and a half of yam land, and the only boat in Pitcairn's, a whaleboat. And most unfortunately, a pretext for this impeachment offered itself at just the right time. One of the earliest and most precious laws of the island was the law against trespass. It was held in great reverence, and was regarded as the palladium of the people's liberties. About 30 years ago an important case came before the courts under this law, in this wise. A chicken belonging to Elizabeth Young, aged at that time 58, a daughter of John Mills, one of the mutineers of the Bounty, trespassed upon the grounds of Thursday October Christian, aged 29, a grandson of Fletcher Christian, one of the mutineers. Christian killed the chicken. According to the law, Christian could keep the chicken, or, if he preferred, he could restore its remains to the owner and receive damages in produce to an amount equivalent to the waste and injury wrought by the trespasser. The court records set forth that the said Christian aforesaid did deliver the aforesaid remains to the said Elizabeth Young, and did demand 1 bushel of yams in satisfaction of the damage done. But Elizabeth Young considered the demand exorbitant. The parties could not agree. Therefore Christian brought suit in the courts. He lost his case in the justice's court. At least, he was awarded only a half a peck of yams, which he considered insufficient, and in the nature of a defeat. He appealed. The case lingered several years in an ascending grade of courts, and always resulted in decrees sustaining the original verdict, and finally the thing got into the Supreme Court, and there it stuck for 20 years. But last summer even the Supreme Court managed to arrive at a decision at last. Once more the original verdict was sustained. Christian then said he was satisfied, but Stavely was present, and whispered to him and to his lawyer, suggesting, as a mere form, that the original law be exhibited, in order to make sure that it still existed. It seemed an odd idea, but an ingenious one. So the demand was made. A messenger was sent to the magistrate's house. He presently returned with the tidings that it had disappeared from among the state archives. The court now pronounced its late decision void, since it had been made under a law which had no actual existence. Great excitement ensued immediately. The news swept abroad over the whole island that the palladium of the public liberties was lost, maybe treasonably destroyed. Within 30 minutes almost the entire nation were in the courtroom, that is to say, the church. The impeachment of the chief magistrate followed, upon Stavely's motion. The accused met his misfortune with the dignity which became his great office. He did not plead or even argue. He offered the simple defense that he had not meddled with the missing law, that he had kept the state archives in the same candle-box that had been used as their depository from the beginning, and that he was innocent of the removal or destruction of the lost document. But nothing could save him. He was found guilty of misprision of treason, and degraded from his office, and all his property was confiscated. The lamest part of the whole shameful matter was the reason suggested by his enemies for his destruction of the law, to wit, that he did it to favor Christian, because Christian was his cousin, whereas Stavely was the only individual in the entire nation who was not his cousin. The reader must remember that all these people are the descendants of half a dozen men, that the first children intermarried together and bore grandchildren to the mutineers, that these grandchildren intermarried, after them great and great-great-grandchildren intermarried, so that today everybody is blood kin to everybody. Moreover, the relationships are wonderfully, even astoundingly mixed up and complicated. A stranger, for instance, says to an islander, "You speak of that young woman as your cousin. A while ago you called her your aunt." "Well, she is my aunt, and my cousin, too, and also my stepsister, my niece, my 4th cousin, my 33rd cousin, my 42nd cousin, my great-aunt, my grandmother, my widowed sister-in-law, and next week she will be my wife." So the charge of nepotism against the chief magistrate was weak, but no matter, weak or strong, it suited Stavely. Stavely was immediately elected to the vacant magistracy, and oozing reform from every pore, he went vigorously to work. In no long time religious services raged everywhere and unceasingly. By command, the second prayer of the Sunday morning service, which had customarily endured some 35 or 40 minutes, and had pleaded for the world, first by continent and then by national and tribal detail, was extended to an hour and a half, and made to include supplications in behalf of the possible peoples in the several planets. Everybody was pleased with this. Everybody said, "Now this is something like." By command, the usual 3-hour sermons were doubled in length. The nation came in a body to testify their gratitude to the new magistrate. The old law forbidding cooking on the Sabbath was extended to the prohibition of eating also. By command, Sunday school was privileged to spread over into the week. The joy of all classes was complete. In one short month the new magistrate had become the people's idol. The time was ripe for this man's next move. He began, cautiously at first, to poison the public mind against England. He took the chief citizens aside, one by one, and conversed with them on this topic. Presently he grew bolder and spoke out. He said the nation owed it to itself, to its honor, to its great traditions, to rise in its might and throw off this galling English yoke. But the simple islanders answered, "We had not noticed that it galled. How does it gall? England sends a ship once in 3 or 4 years to give us soap and clothing, and things which we sorely need and gratefully receive. She never troubles us, she lets us go our own way." "She lets you go your own way." So slaves have felt and spoken in all the ages. This speech shows how fallen you are, how base, how brutalized you have become under this grinding tyranny. What, has all manly pride forsaken you? Is liberty nothing? Are you content to be a mere appendage to a foreign and hateful sovereignty, when you might rise up and take your rightful place in the august family of nations, great, free, enlightened, independent, the minion of no sceptered master, but the arbiter of your own destiny, and a voice and a power in decreeing the destinies of your sister sovereignties of the world?" Speeches like this produced an effect by and by. Citizens began to feel the English yoke. They did not know exactly how or whereabouts they felt it, but they were perfectly certain they did feel it. They got to grumbling a good deal, and chafing under their chains, and longing for relief and release. They presently fell to hating the English flag, that sign and symbol of their nation's degradation. They ceased to glance up at it as they passed the Capitol, but averted their eyes and grated their teeth, and one morning, when it was found trampled into the mud at the foot of the staff, they left it there, and no man put his hand to it to hoist it again. A certain thing which was sure to happen sooner or later happened now. Some of the chief citizens went to the magistrate by night and said, "We can endure this hated tyranny no longer. How can we cast it off?" "By a coup d'etat." "How?" "A coup d'etat. It is like this. Everything is got ready, and at the appointed moment, I, as the official head of the nation, publicly and solemnly proclaim its independence, and absolve it from allegiance to any and all other powers whatsoever." "Well, that sounds simple and easy. We can do that right away. Then what will be the next thing to do?" "Seize all the defenses and public properties of all kinds, establish martial law, put the army and navy on a war footing, and proclaim the empire." This fine program dazzled these innocents. They said, "This is grand, this is splendid, but will not England resist?" "Let her. This rock is a Gibraltar." "True, but what about the empire? Do we need an empire and an emperor?" "What you need, my friends, is unification. Look at Germany. Look at Italy. They are unified. Unification is the thing. It makes living dear. That constitutes progress. We must have a standing army and a navy. Taxes follow as a matter of course. All these things summed up make grandeur. With unification and grandeur, what more can you want? Very well, only the empire can confer these boons." So on the 8th day of December, Pitcairn's Island was proclaimed a free and independent nation, and on the same day the solemn coronation of Butterworth I, Emperor of Pitcairn's Island, took place amid great rejoicings and festivities. The entire nation, with the exception of 14 persons, mainly little children, marched past the throne in single file, with banners and music, the procession being upward of 90 feet long, and some said it was as much as 3/4 of a minute passing a given point. Nothing like it had ever been seen in the history of the island before. Public enthusiasm was measureless. Now straightway imperial reforms began. Orders of nobility were instituted. A minister of the navy was appointed, and the whaleboat put in commission. A minister of war was created, and ordered to proceed at once with the formation of a standing army. A First Lord of the Treasury was named, and commanded to get up a taxation scheme, and also open negotiations for treaties, offensive, defensive, and commercial, with foreign powers. Some generals and admirals were appointed, also some chamberlains, some equerries in waiting, and some lords of the bedchamber. At this point all the material was used up. The Grand Duke of Galilee, Minister of War, complained that all the 16 grown men in the empire had been given great offices, and consequently would not consent to serve in the ranks, wherefore his standing army was at a standstill. The Marquis of Ararat, Minister of the Navy, made a similar complaint. He said he was willing to steer the whaleboat himself, but he must have somebody to man her. The Emperor did the best he could in the circumstances. He took all the boys above the age of 10 years away from their mothers, and pressed them into the army, thus constructing a corps of 17 privates, officered by 1 lieutenant general and 2 major generals. This pleased the Minister of War, but procured the enmity of all the mothers in the land, for they said their precious ones must now find bloody graves in the fields of war, and he would be answerable for it. Some of the more heartbroken and unappeasable among them lay constantly wait for the Emperor, and threw yams at him, unmindful of the bodyguard. On account of the extreme scarcity of material, it was found necessary to require the Duke of Bethany, Postmaster General, to pull stroke-oar in the navy, and thus sit in the rear of a noble of lower degree, namely, Viscount Canaan, Lord Justice of the Common Pleas. This turned the Duke of Bethany into tolerably open malcontent and a secret conspirator, a thing which the Emperor foresaw, but could not help. Things went from bad to worse. The Emperor raised Nancy Peters to the peerage on one day, and married her the next, notwithstanding, for reasons of state, the cabinet had strenuously advised him to marry Emmeline, eldest daughter of the Archbishop of Bethlehem. This caused trouble in a powerful quarter, the Church. The new Empress secured the support and friendship of 2/3 of the 36 grown women in the nation by absorbing them into her court as maids of honor, but this made deadly enemies of the remaining 12. The families of the maids of honor soon began to rebel, because there was nobody at home to keep house. The 12 snubbed women refused to enter the imperial kitchen as servants, so the Empress had to require the Countess of Jericho and other great court dames to fetch water, sweep the palace, and perform other menial and equally distasteful services. This made bad blood in that department. Everybody fell to complaining that the taxes levied for the support of the army, the navy, and the rest of the imperial establishment were intolerably burdensome, and were reducing the nation to beggary. The Emperor's reply, "Look at Germany, look at Italy, are you better than they, and haven't you unification?" did not satisfy them. They said, "People can't eat unification, and we are starving. Agriculture has ceased. Everybody is in the army, everybody is in the navy, everybody is in the public service, standing around in a uniform, with nothing whatever to do, nothing to eat, and nobody to till the fields. Look at Germany, look at Italy, it is the same there. Such is unification, and there's no other way to get it, no other way to keep it after you've got it," said the poor Emperor always. But the grumblers only replied, "We can't stand the taxes, we can't stand them." Now, right on top of this, the cabinet reported a national debt amounting to upward of $45, half a dollar to every individual in the nation, and they proposed to fund something. They had heard that this was always done in such emergencies. They proposed duties on exports, also on imports, and they wanted to issue bonds, also paper money redeemable in yams and cabbages in 50 years. They said the pay of the army and of the navy and of the whole government machine was far in arrears, and unless something was done, and done immediately, national bankruptcy must ensue, and possibly insurrection and revolution. The Emperor at once resolved upon a high-handed measure, and one of a nature never before heard of in Pitcairn's Island. He went in state to the church on Sunday morning, with the army at his back, and commanded the Minister of the Treasury to take up a collection. That was the feather that broke the camel's back. First one citizen, and then another, rose and refused to submit to this unheard-of outrage, and each refusal was followed by the immediate confiscation of the malcontents' property. This vigor soon stopped the refusals, and the collection proceeded amid a sullen and ominous silence. As the Emperor withdrew with the troops, he said, "I will teach you who is master here." Several persons shouted, "Down with unification!" They were at once arrested and torn from the arms of their weeping friends by the soldiery. But in the meantime, as any prophet might have foreseen, a social democrat had been developed. As the Emperor stepped into the gilded imperial wheelbarrow at the church door, the social democrat stabbed at him 15 or 16 times with a harpoon, but fortunately with such a peculiarly social democratic unprecision of aim as to do no damage. That very night the convulsion came. The nation rose as one man, though 49 of the revolutionists were of the other sex. The infantry threw down their pitchforks, the artillery cast aside their coconuts, the navy revolted, the Emperor was seized and bound hand and foot in his palace. He was very much depressed. He said, "I freed you from a grinding tyranny. I lifted you out of your degradation, and made you a nation among nations. I gave you a strong, compact, centralized government, and more than all, I gave you the blessing of blessings, unification. I have done all this, and my reward is hatred, insult, and these bonds. Take me, do with me as you will. I here resign my crown and all my dignities, and gladly do I release myself from their too heavy burden. For your sake I took them up, for your sake I lay them down. The imperial jewel is no more. Now bruise and defile as ye will the useless setting." By a unanimous voice the people condemned the ex-emperor and the social democrat to perpetual banishment from church services, or to perpetual labor as galley slaves in the whaleboat, whichever they might prefer. The next day the nation assembled again, and rehoisted the British flag, reinstated the British tyranny, reduced the nobility to the condition of commoners again, and then straightway turned their diligent attention to the weeding of the ruined and neglected yam-patches, and the rehabilitation of the old useful industries and the old healing and solacing pieties. The ex-emperor restored the lost trespass law, and explained that he had stolen it not to injure anyone, but to further his political projects. Therefore the nation gave the late chief magistrate his office again, and also his alienated property. Upon reflection, the ex-emperor and the social democrat chose perpetual banishment from religious services, in preference to perpetual labor as galley slaves with perpetual religious services, as they phrased it. Wherefore the people believed that the poor fellow's troubles had unseated their reason, and so they judged it best to confine them for the present, which they did. Such is the history of Pitcairn's doubtful acquisition. End of chapter 5.